So hi everybody, welcome to our nutrition presentation. My name is Samantha McCarthy. I'm a registered dietitian here at Cedardale. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit tonight about the new dietary guidelines and kind of go over what's in there and get a lot of your questions answered about some basic nutrition stuff as we go along. My friends at home, if you guys have any questions as we go through our presentation, feel free to put it in the chat and I will get to it at some point. Guys here in the studio, just feel free to raise your hand. Let me know if you have a question as we go along, and I'll try my best to address those questions. But we'll first start a little introduction on me. I've been here at Cedardale as a registered dietitian for about 7-8 years now. And I see clients one-on-one, and I also run the Healthy Living program, which is our group wellness program, and have had a lot of fun and success with that program as well. And I also oversee the group exercise department here at Cedardale too. So I've got my hands in a lot of different places around Cedardale, but I love it. Let's see, before coming here to Cedardale, I worked in corporate wellness. So I worked down at Oracle and I did nutrition and fitness for Oracle. And now I just pretty much here at the club and that's it. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? I'm going to start sharing my screen for you guys. Okay. Hold on. All right. Gotta love technology, right? It's like a good and a bad thing. Great. Okay, so the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. Has anyone ever heard of these before? Do we even know what they are? Maybe, kind of, a little bit. Okay, so the Dietary Guidelines for Americans come out every 5 years. And they're a set of guidelines that discuss just basic nutrition for the general public. And the important thing to note here is that it is for the general public, and the goal is to prevent disease, chronic diseases, and just to keep everybody healthy. So it's not meant to treat specific diseases. Okay, so you might have certain conditions or know people that have certain conditions, in which case, then it's a certain set of course nutrition recommendations. So these are just general guidelines. Think of them more preventive guidelines in order to keep you healthy and prevent all those chronic diseases such as diabetes, heart disease, certain cancers, of course being overweight, obese, osteoporosis, and a whole host of other things as well. So it's kind of the basics of the dietary guidelines for Americans. So what we'll do tonight is we'll go over the 4 key guidelines that they outline, and we'll break those down, and then we'll talk about how to build a healthy eating pattern. We'll talk about some of the common nutrients that are missing in many Americans' diets and how do we increase those, okay? All right, so the Dietary Guidelines for Americans provide science-based advice, that's very important, on what to eat and drink in order to promote health, reduce risk of chronic disease, and also to meet just basic nutrient needs, okay? So to make sure we get enough of vitamin A, vitamin C, you know, your B vitamins, calcium, all those important nutrients that we need, it does make sure that you're going to meet all of those. So if you follow the guidelines, then you should be pretty good, assuming you're fairly healthy. They've been around since 1980, so they have been in existence for quite a few years. And as stipulated by law, it's the USDA and Health and Human Services that must update the dietary guidelines at least every 5 years. So usually they run on a 5-year cycle. So right now we're 2020 to 2025. Next will be 2026 to 2030. It's hard to say, but so every year what they do is they review the science and they release them. Okay, and they may change things, but a lot of the basic principles of the dietary guidelines have been in place for many years and they haven't changed, but there all are small things that have changed over the years. And one of the big ones is the cholesterol thing, which we'll talk a little bit about when we get to saturated fats. Okay, so very good. All right, so how do they develop the dietary guidelines? So first, what they do is they put out the questions, and recently they just changed this Now it's more of a public forum. So what they'll do is they'll go with the federal agencies, and they're also going to put questions online. And it's an online forum that people can go on and put certain questions or concerns or topics that they would like to be researched and looked at when it comes to the dietary guidelines. From there, they develop their committee. Now, this committee involves 20 different nationally recognized medical professionals, and these will be a variety of people. So it's not just doctors. You're going to have some practitioners, but you're also going to have epidemiologists, clinical trialists, so people who are actually doing the research studies or conducting the research studies, and then a whole host of other people from all across America. So they get a good picture of what's going on in each different area of America, because it's very different, you know, up here compared to what the nutrition issues are down south versus out west. So they want to get a good picture of that, and that's how they develop the committee. Okay. Now, step 3, they will then go through all those questions and start to develop the guidelines. And they'll start with the previous 5 years, and they'll kind of build on that and take a look at the research and say, okay, is this research still valid? Have things changed over the last 5 years? And what can we update? And then from there, they're going to implement it. So it goes out to all of those federal agencies that need this information, so the word can start to spread and we can start to get people to eat a little bit healthier. Okay. All right. So next, why? Why do we do all of this? So hold on one second. Let me just take a look at the chat here for all of my friends at home. Okay. I think we're good. Okay. Hey, all right. So there's quite a few reasons why we do all of this. So what I want to do first is really just talk a little bit about what is going on in our country right now. Okay. Well, other than COVID, we know COVID is going on, but what else is going on with our health in our country? So the reason that they do this is, if you take a look at this first chart or graph that I have for you, what they do is they assign a score, and they do this based on a list of questions that they will bring to people. And this score rates essentially how healthy are we eating. Okay, so you can see on this chart here, as best you can see, I know it's a little small for some of you guys, but I will be sending these slides out for you guys afterwards, that we're not doing pretty good. The score on average runs around 55 to some years up to 60. A score of 100 would mean that we're eating pretty healthy, right? So we're doing pretty good. Okay. So overall, as Americans, we're not doing good. We're doing about half of that. And that's why we have so many of the issues that we have. And why they put out these guidelines, or what really started them to put out these guidelines. So I want to go back. There we go. Okay, so some other interesting statistics here on our current level of health. So we'll start with these are all for chronic health conditions. We'll start with overweight and obesity. Right now, in combination with both being overweight and obese, now that is defined as a BMI of over 25 for people who are overweight. Obese would be considered BMI over 30, and the way that that is calculated is simply through your weight and your height. That's it. So you can go online, you can Google right now if you whip out your phone, and you could say, what's my BMI, put your height and your weight in, you'd be able to tell if you are overweight or obese. Okay, so right now 74% of our American population is either overweight or obese, which is a pretty fascinating statistic, and that's pretty high. It's a big problem for us. Okay, now when it comes to cardiovascular disease, so this would be all of your heart-related diseases that we have. Okay, heart disease, as it has been in many, many years past, is the leading cause of death. So many of you guys know that. Okay, it's also estimated that about 18.2 million adults have coronary artery disease, which is a pretty severe disease that puts you at high risk for a lot of heart-related issues. Okay, and then more shockingly, stroke is the 5th leading cause of death. Anybody know what the biggest cause of stroke is? One of the biggest causes? What's one of the biggest causes of stroke? Stress can lead to it. What was it? Clogged arteries is a big one, absolutely. Now, high blood pressure. High blood pressure is another huge one. And most people don't know that they have high blood pressure, okay? And actually, the statistic right now for high blood pressure is 45% of adults. That's almost half of our population has high blood pressure. And a lot of those people don't even know it, okay? So they don't take it, or they don't go to the doctor, or whatever happens. So those are some pretty staggering statistics when it comes to overweight, obesity, and heart disease. Now, looking at a couple other chronic diseases, we look at diabetes. It's about 10 million people in the US right now have either type 1 or type 2 diabetes. But even more shockingly, a big chunk of our population is living with prediabetes. Again, that's something that a lot of people don't know, is whether they have prediabetes. Now, prediabetes is something that has to be tested by your doctor. So they take a blood test, they look to see certain numbers, and if you're in a certain range that you're elevated a little bit, that means you're at risk for developing diabetes. Okay, so it's a pretty big number. About 35% of Americans are pre-diabetic right now, on top of the 10 million that already have diabetes. So pretty scary there. Now, cancer. Cancer used to just be something that, wasn't really a chronic disease. It was something that was caused by something else, like exposure to a pollutant or smoking or something like that. We never really thought of it as something that was chronic. But a lot of the research that's coming out now is there are many types of cancer. We're talking here specifically about colon cancer and breast cancer that are considered chronic diseases and also preventable through our own lifestyle choices. So managing our lifestyle and keeping ourselves healthy by following the dietary guidelines can help prevent some of these types of cancers. Now, not all of these types of cancers are going to be preventable or related to your lifestyle, but some of them are, and we can really slow down a lot of cancers or lower that development of cancer by changing our own lifestyle. Okay. And then last section on this chart talks about bone health and muscle strength. And most importantly, osteoporosis. So that's a big issue, especially for women as we get older. And osteoporosis in many cases is preventable if you do the right things throughout your life, by getting enough calcium, enough vitamin D, by doing your strength training, keeping yourself strong, and maintaining a healthy weight. So in short, we've got a lot of major issues going on in our country right now with our health, and that's why these dietary guidelines are so important to follow. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get to these guidelines. So the first thing we'll talk about is nutrition and health across the lifespan. So we'll talk about the guidelines and key recommendations. Now, the full dietary guidelines is this year, I think it's about 165 pages long. So we're going to kind of skim the surface. I'm obviously not going to go over all 165 pages of that, of those guidelines. But I'm noting that particularly here because we are going to go through some of the different stages of life. There's a lot more in the actual dietary guidelines, different stages such as pregnancy, lactation, just general adulthood. So they really dive deep. I'm just going to kind of skim and pick a few of these areas that I think are important for you guys. But if you wanted to get more information, I highly recommend that you take a look at that big guideline, and it's available to the public. And I can send links to that as well. Okay. All right. So key guideline number 1. At every stage of life, infancy, toddlerhood, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, pregnancy, lactation, older adulthood, it's never too late or too early to start eating healthfully. So sometimes I get clients that are maybe a little bit on the older side, that are hesitant to change, and say, oh, the damage is already done. It's like, no, you can change it. So that's very important. So the 3 different types of age groups we're going to talk about today is we'll start with infants, and then we'll go with more the kind of 6-month to 12-month age, so a little bit older infants and toddlers. And then we'll talk, of course, about adults and a little bit about older adults as well. Okay, so when it comes to basically infants, so 6 months and under, the recommendations is that infants should have pretty much human milk and human milk only, so breast milk of mom, up until 6 months. If that is not possible for whatever reason, then it's recommended that you supplement or go to the infant formula. But breast milk is preferred if that is an option. Now, once 6 months hits and up until 12 months, then we can start to introduce real whole foods into their life. And prior to or previous to old recommendations, we used to kind of back off of the common allergens like nuts and other foods like that kids are often allergic to. But in the new guidelines, we want to introduce those common allergens as early as possible. So starting at 6 months, you do want to introduce little ones to these things because they're less likely to develop an allergy based on research if we expose them earlier in life. Okay, so as they get into that 6 months to 12-month range, we can start to put a little of these things in and see how they do. All right, so now encourage infants and toddlers, just like us adults, to consume a variety of different foods and different food groups. Avoid foods and beverages with added sugars. We'll talk a lot more detail about added sugars a little later in the presentation, but this is really important. I see this a lot with parents that juice is a big one. We'll talk about beverages in a moment. And then also a big problem, and this is more with our food supply, is that kids' foods or foods marketed to kids and infants and toddlers is often sometimes the highest in added sugars, unfortunately. And that's what we're giving to our kids, which can obviously lead to many problems later in life. So trying to minimize those and stay away from them as much as possible is recommended, especially in these early years. Because the early years, these first few foods that we're giving them, this is what develops their habits and what they decide that they're going to want later in life. So if you're starting them off with a lot of sweet things, it's not uncommon that they're going to want a lot of sweet things later in life. And you might be one of those people that's a dessert addict or an ice cream addict or whatever it is, if we're starting them young. So it's best to keep them off of a lot of those sweet things. And then also limiting foods and beverages higher in sodium. So when it comes to beverages, this is always their fluids. This is always a hot topic with parents. So quickly, some of the things that we want to avoid when it comes to the infants, toddlers, and even so when they get into older age, but more importantly, when they're little, when they rely so much on their fluids, you want to try to avoid juice, and then anything that is sugar sweetened or even a sugar alternative, okay? So a sugar alternative would be something like Splenda, Equal, aspartame, which is added into a lot of diet products and sports drinks, stevia, sugar alcohols, which are in a lot of different things. It's not recommended for kids to have these, one, because again, it tastes sweet and we're getting them acclimated to that sweet taste. But also it's a safety issue too. There's not a lot of research that says that these things are safe for our kids or not. So it's best to not feed them that. They really should be having cow's milk whenever possible. Up until the first year, it should mostly be formula or human milk, so breast milk from mom, okay? After that, cow's milk is recommended whenever possible. The only equivalent to cow's milk, so if your child is lactose intolerant or you choose not to give them dairy, the only equivalent nutritionally, meaning it has all the same proteins and the same calcium and vitamin D, is soy milk, okay? All the other milks, and there's so many now, cashew milk, almond milk, all that kind of stuff, the nutrition profile is just not there. So we're not getting enough nutrients into these little ones. If you're giving them a milk alternative like that, they're going to be missing out. So whenever possible, try to do cow's milk or soy milk if they can. Obviously, if there's allergies, that's a whole different story. But when everything is good, that's what you want to do. Okay. And then eventually, after a year, we want to get them to that healthy diet pattern, which we're going to talk about in a moment, just like adults. So before we get to adults, because that's where we'll spend the last section of class today, let's talk about older adults, okay? So by definition here with the dietary guidelines, older adults are defined as 60 and older. They said it, not me, okay? So 60 and older would be considered older adults, okay? So there's a lot of nutritional concern as people get older. Many things start to happen: quality of life, independence, ability to chew, swallow, prepare their own food. So nutritional adequacy can really start to drop in later years in life. So paying attention to our older adults, whether it's yourself or parents or something like that, is really important. So some key concepts when it comes to older adults, or key considerations: protein. Okay, 50% of women over the age of 60 and 30% of men do not meet the protein needs that they need at this age. Protein needs actually go up as you get older compared to when you're a healthy young adult, because you're not absorbing as much of that protein. So you actually need to eat more protein. And protein is, your meats, your eggs, your dairy products, but also the plant-based alternatives like nuts, beans, seeds, peanut butter, almond butter. A lot of those can be recommended for older adults if chewing is an issue. Like a lot of times meat consumption starts to drop because it's hard to chew or it's hard to prepare, they can't afford it, whatever it is. So a lot of those plant-based alternatives are a lot softer and they're easier to eat. So those are great for older adults. The other nutrient that's important is vitamin B12. Vitamin B12, it's something that your doctor will start to monitor as you get older as well, because absorption is a huge issue here. As we get older, we just absorb less and less of a lot of things, but B12 specifically. And B12 is important for many different functions in the body. So oftentimes B12 is really often supplemented, or I know a lot of people, if it's really low, they'll do vitamin B12 shots in order to get those levels up. But from food sources, a lot of your protein-based food sources that we just discussed, especially the animal-based ones, are going to be the ones that are high in vitamin B12. So by increasing protein intake, you're also increasing your B12 intake. So for older adults, you kind of get two birds with one stone there. Okay. And then the other big issue for older adults that is often seen is fluid intake. Older adults just don't get enough fluids. Okay, so trying to get more water into older adults or to yourself is really important. And it's often a big reason for hospitalizations as people get older is dehydration. So as much water as you can get in, as long as you're healthy and have no conditions that stop you from drinking that water, really try to make that a priority. Okay. Any questions so far? Go ahead, Fred. So B12 is high in protein-based foods. So eggs, meats, and dairy products, it's big, and seafood as well. Yep, so those sources are good for us. Okay, good. Okay, all right, so let's get to key guideline number 2. So this is when we dive more into the recommendations for adults. Okay, or sorry, it's guideline number 3. Guideline number 2 is pretty quick. So guideline number 2 just talks about, more of your personal beverage and cultural, your personal food and beverage choices that go with your culture, your religion, and just your preferences in general. So a healthy dietary pattern can benefit all individuals, regardless of age, race, ethnicity, or current health status. And the dietary guidelines really try to include all foods. So even if you are Indian and you eat more of an Indian-based diet, you can still meet all the dietary guidelines by following that Indian-based diet. So it doesn't have to be your typical American diet, whatever you see in your mind. It can include all different foods from all sectors of the world. And that's basically what key guideline number 2 is. So it's pretty brief on that one. So key guideline number 3, this is the big one. Focus on meeting food group needs with nutrient-dense foods and beverages and stay within calorie limits. Okay, so what the heck does that mean? Okay, an underlying premise of the dietary guidelines is that nutritional needs should be met primarily from food and beverages. From food and beverages, not from supplements, vitamins, shakes, all kinds of that crazy stuff that's available out there. It's really from food and beverages, okay? Because even your specialty shake that you have has all these crazy nutrients listed on the back and vitamins. It's not the same quality, and it's not the same availability to you when you drink or eat those supplements or vitamins or whatever it is that you're having. For whatever reason, what is in food in addition to all those vitamins, minerals, etc., that's always better absorbed and more accepted by your body. So we want to focus really more on the food and the beverage, not all the crazy other stuff that you could spend millions of dollars on. Nutrient-dense foods provide vitamins, minerals, and other health-promoting components and have no or little added sugars, fats, and sodium. And a healthy dietary pattern consists of nutrient-dense foods or nutrient-dense forms of food and beverages across all food groups in recommended amounts and within calorie limits. Okay, so let's dive into this a little bit deeper. So take a look at this next image that I have for you. So what are we talking about when we say nutrient dense versus maybe just calorie dense and nutrient empty, we'll say? Well, if you look at this picture, what you see is on the left side, you'll see a different food, okay, which would be a typical American choice, we'll say. So the first one is beef, ground beef. So this would be 80% lean ground beef, okay? So per serving, which is roughly 3 ounces or so, we're talking here, typically you're going to be getting about 210 calories or so, okay? Now, if you were to choose the 93% lean, so the much leaner version of that, for 3 ounces, now we're only talking about 122 calories. So we still get all the same nutrients from the beef with the lean option, but now we're cutting out almost 90 calories by just simply going to the leaner version. So a small switch like that can make a big difference. Okay, so next line down there, you'll see this is breaded fried cod. Okay, so you go out to your restaurant and you're ordering the fried cod, we'll say. Okay, so it's breaded, it's, fried, all that good stuff. So a typical portion, which not at a restaurant, but for purposes here, 4 ounces for that. That's going to bring you about 270 calories or so. If you were to just go with cod, so you did it at home, you baked it, maybe a little bit of oil in there, some spices, some herbs, okay, no breading, no frying, no anything like that, okay, that same 4 ounce portion, instead of 270 calories or more, now we're talking barely 100 calories. So we're cutting out a big chunk of calories just by removing the breading and the frying and all that stuff. So this is what we're really talking about here with that nutrient dense versus calorie dense and nutrient empty foods, is there's a lot of these little switches that you can make throughout the day that make a huge difference. Okay, so in this chart, you can see there's a few more options. I won't go through every single one of them, but down the line, you'll see whole milk versus skim milk. With coffee, it's a mocha something, so like a latte or something flavored or something. Huge change there in calories and sugar. Buttered popcorn versus just regular old popcorn, like maybe a Skinny Pop or something. So a lot of different examples on this chart that you guys can read through. Okay. So what does dietary pattern mean? Okay, what does that really mean? This is an important one, and this is something that the Dietary Guidelines really stresses, is this dietary pattern. It says it over and over and over again. Dietary pattern is important because we live in a world right now where you're looking at the news, you're reading the news, whatever it is, and it's all about one nutrient, right? Or one food, right? Kale is going to do this, or tea is going to do this, or we need more vitamin D, or we need more of this. When in reality, yes, I mean, all those things are great and wonderful, but we don't eat like that. We eat a lot of different things, right? And that's what we want to focus on, is that dietary pattern. That's what matters more. So what is a dietary pattern? It represents the totality of what individuals habitually eat and drink. Habitually eat and drink. Not that one ice cream that you had over the weekend, okay? Not that one piece of kale that you had, but what you habitually eat and drink, Okay, so day in and day out, what are you consuming? That's what a dietary pattern is. And the dietary patterns really better predict overall health status and chronic disease risk compared to just focusing on that one nutrient or that one food or whatever it is. So when we talk about dietary patterns, what are we working towards? Core elements. Now, these two concepts, the dietary patterns and these foods that are listed on this slide, these have been around in the dietary guidelines for almost all the years they've been in existence. This has never changed because year in and year out, research shows that if your dietary pattern, so your habitual eating every single day, day in and day out, looks more like this, then you're doing pretty good. Okay, so what is it? First off, vegetables of all types, not just kale, but all different colors and all different types, including starchy vegetables like potatoes and squashes and stuff like that, dark leafy green vegetables, bell peppers, so a wide range of vegetables. And the key is a wide range and a variety of colors. Okay, colors is really important here because the different colors of our fruits and our vegetables, what makes those fruits and vegetables that certain color, that's what makes it healthy. Okay, all those different things that are in there to make it that beautiful blueberry or that beautiful purple of the eggplant or the red of the tomato or the bell pepper, all of those components is where all the nutrients are, particularly antioxidants. Okay, so you want to have that nice variety in your vegetable intake and also your fruits because that means you're getting the most nutrients. Okay, so if you just eat broccoli and that's your only vegetable that you like, I mean, that's better than eating potato chips all day long, but you're not getting all the nutrients that you need with just that broccoli. So add that variety in. Okay, when it comes to fruits, again, colors, but especially whole fruits. That's emphasized in the dietary guidelines. Whole fruit basically means, really picking up that apple, picking up that banana, cutting into that cantaloupe, instead of dried fruits, canned fruits, okay, that are often in a lot of sugar and syrup or whatever it is. Frozen fruits are okay because those are typically whole in form unless they've been doctored in some way, shape, or form, which they can often be, but it's always best to get them in their whole form, okay, if you can. So just grabbing them right off the grocery store shelves or from the farmer's market. Now, when it comes to grains, when we talk about grains, we're talking about a pretty big category here. Everything from bread to pasta to rice to crackers to, anything really that's kind of that carb based. The goal is to have at least half of them be whole. Not 100%, okay, but at least half whole grain. How do we know if it's whole grain? We look at the label. Okay, or we're eating the whole grain. Okay, so maybe you're eating popcorn. Popcorn is a whole grain, not a vegetable. Corn is a grain. Okay, so popcorn's a whole grain. Rice in the form of brown rice versus white rice, that would be a whole grain. Quinoa, whole grain. Bulgur, oatmeal, farro, freekeh. There's so many different whole grains that just come in their regular whole grain form. But then we start to get in the more processed version like breads and crackers and flours, etc., those kinds of grains. Then we need to look at the label. And what we have to see on the label is we need to see whole, the word whole, in front of every grain that is present in that food. Okay, so let's take bread, for example. If it's whole wheat, that's great. If it's enriched wheat flour that's in that bread, that's not a whole grain. Okay, so we really have to dive into label reading here to know if the grains that you're having are truly whole grain or not. Because labels can be really deceiving, especially when it comes to those like bread products or cereals or stuff like that. It might say multi-grain or 12 grain or just wheat or just oatmeal. But truly it's a processed grain. So you're not getting all of the benefits of the whole grain. Okay, so you want to really make sure you read your labels and you know what you're consuming. Okay, so get at least half your grains to be whole grains. Okay, it doesn't have to be 100%. So if on occasion you have that piece of white bread or white pasta or white rice, don't beat yourself up as long as most of what you're consuming is that whole grain. Because without that whole grain, we're missing the fiber. We're missing a lot of vitamins and minerals like B vitamins, folates, so many good things that are present in the whole grain that are taken out when we just have white bread or white pasta. Okay. All right, now dairy. Okay, dairy is always a hot topic. So dairy, it is in the dietary guidelines that we as Americans need to consume more dairy. We don't do enough dairy, especially as we get older. Now, I'm not talking about have more ice cream and have more cheese. We're talking about yogurt and milk, okay, and some other things too. So on this list, you'll see fat-free or low-fat milk, yogurt. There is a little bit of cheese in there, lactose-free versions of these products, or fortified soy beverages or soy products, because those are considered equivalent to dairy products. Okay, so we, especially as we get older, do not consume enough dairy. And again, we're going to be missing a lot of that calcium and vitamin D that's present in dairy that isn't really present in a lot of other foods. And that's why it is a nutrient of concern or a food group of concern when it comes to us Americans. Okay. Now, protein-based foods, mostly lean protein sources. And I'm going to show you in a few minutes how we as Americans are doing with all of these different food groups. But in general, we're doing pretty good with meat. We as Americans, we love meat. We get plenty of meat in. We're not worried about that. But what we're missing is a lot of the other protein-based foods. Your seafood, your nuts, your seeds, your beans and legumes. And those types of protein sources provide a lot of nutrients. So incorporating a lot more of those and a little less meat is what is generally recommended in the dietary guidelines. And then lastly, oils. So getting more oils instead of butter, a lot of processed margarines, things like that. Really just getting good olive oil or other vegetable oils into our day. And a lot of what we have is mostly the unhealthy saturated fat types, okay? So this is a little bit hard to see, but what it does, what it outlines here is how much we should be having of each of these different food groups. This is based on a 2,000 calorie diet. So that might be appropriate for you. It might not be appropriate for you. That might be too low or too high. It really depends. But in general, the average American probably needs around 2,000 calories, depending on where they are currently at in physical activity levels. So that's what the guidelines are based on. So when you take a look at this chart, it gives you how much you should be aiming to have either on a weekly or daily basis, depending on the food group, in order to get all of your nutrients in. So keep in mind, this is for generally healthy people just trying to prevent disease, not to treat a certain condition or to lose weight or to, do whatever it is that you want to do in your own personal health goals. Okay, this is just to prevent disease and to get all those nutrients in. Okay, so a quick rundown of all these numbers. So it's recommended that we get the equivalent of 1.5 cups of dark leafy greens per week. Okay, not per day, per week. 1.5 cups of dark leafy greens. Spinach, kale, collard greens, a lot of your lettuces and mixed green mixes that you find at the grocery store would all count towards these dark leafy green vegetables. So 1.5 cups here. When it comes to red and orange vegetables, 5.5 cup equivalents per week. So roughly 1 per day or so. Okay, a little bit less. Okay, so that's a lot. I think a lot of Americans probably don't get enough of that red and orange group, because I mean, when you think about vegetables, what is that? Tomatoes, peppers, not many others that we can think of, right? So we could probably increase that a little bit more. Beans, peas, and lentils, they are listed here in vegetables, but they are also a protein source, keep in mind. So the recommendation for beans, peas, beans, peas, and lentils is the equivalent of 1.5 cups per week. 1.5 cups per week. Okay. Next, we have starchy vegetables. So starchy vegetables would be potatoes, sweet potatoes. We would consider this probably a lot of your squashes that are a little bit sweeter, like acorn squash and butternut squash. Okay. The equivalent of 5 cups per week is recommended. So again, almost 1 per day, or a little bit less than that. And then final in the other vegetable category, so anything that doesn't fall into that, so your broccoli, your asparagus, and all those other things that we eat, is going to be 4 cups per week. Okay, so that's our vegetable recommendations. Overall, it's roughly 2-ish cups of vegetables per day. Okay, so if we do that, then we're doing pretty good. Okay. All right, next on the list we have fruits. So what we should aim for here is 2 cups per day. 2 cups per day of fruits. Or if it's like an apple or an orange, it would be about a baseball size piece of fruit. And a banana would be about a 6-inch size banana. Okay, that would be equivalent to 1 cup. Okay, next we have our grains. So this is in ounces, which is sometimes a little bit tricky to break down. If you look and dive deeper into the dietary guidelines, into that 164-page document, it does give you what is the equivalent of an ounce for your grains. And you can also find it on the Choose My Plate website, which has the food groups more in detail. But for grains, it's recommended that we have 6-ounce equivalent per day. 6 ounces per day. So about 3 of those should be whole. And then the other 3 ounces could be a white bread or, pizza, which is made with white bread, something like that. Okay. Next on the list, we have dairy, 3 cups per day or equivalents. 3 cups per day. That's pretty high, right? Guarantee most of you guys don't get that. Unless you drink milk, you probably don't get that. Most of us don't. Okay, next is going to be protein-based foods. So for protein-based foods, it's the equivalent about 5.5 ounces per day. Remember, that's minimum, 5.5 ounces per day, okay? But we certainly do that with meats. Don't get me wrong, we hit that. But it breaks it down for seafood, 8 ounces per week. 8 ounces of seafood per week, if you can have that. So 8 ounces, that's half a pound. So maybe 2 different days you have seafood. So you have a 4-ounce salmon one day, and then maybe you have 4 ounces of cod the next day. That would be meeting your seafood requirements. Now, if you can't eat seafood because you've got an allergy or maybe you don't like it, that's okay. You can supplement or try to get your nutrients elsewhere. But if you can, it's recommended that you try to do it about twice a week if you can to get all those nutrients in. Okay. And then for other proteins like your nuts, your seeds, or soy protein, if you don't do meats, is again 5 ounces per week. 5 ounces per week. So let's say you do an ounce of almonds every day. An ounce is about a 1/4 cup. If you did that 5 days a week, then you're meeting your needs. That's good. Okay. And then lastly on that list is oils. Okay, so oils like olive oil or another vegetable oil, it's roughly, it says 27, it's very specific, 27 ounces, I think it is, or 27 grams, which is about 2 tablespoons. So 2 tablespoons per day for oils, okay? And then the last category is that other category, which we'll talk about in a moment. That's your discretionary calories, we'll say, your sugars, your fats, and your sodium and alcohol. Okay. So these are general recommendations based on a 2,000 calorie diet. Again, this is for generally healthy people to prevent disease, not for certain conditions. We would dive deeper, if you've got high blood pressure or if you need to lose weight or something like that, it's going to look a little bit different than this. Okay, but this is going to meet all of your nutrient needs if you do this. Okay. All right, so how are we doing in general as Americans with these recommendations? That is what is shown on this next chart. So the purple at the top, okay, That's the percent of the population that is meeting that food group. And then the blue at the bottom is the percent of the population that is not meeting the requirements of that food group, which you can see is a lot more than the purple. The highest on the purple there, if you can't see it, it's of course refined grains. So breads, pasta, crackers, all that kind of stuff. So we go way over that. We're meeting that for sure. Okay. And the other high ones there that you'll see is meats, like we talked about. So meats and eggs and those kinds of protein. And then the other big one is total grains in general, and that's high because of the refined grains. So everything on that blue line are all the food groups that we're not meeting, okay, which is pretty much all of them, okay? Majority of the population is not meeting these food groups. So obviously, it's a big concern, okay? Okay, so talking a little bit more about quality of our foods, nutrient dense versus calorie dense and nutrient empty. I love this slide or this picture that they have of a simple switch in a burrito bowl. So the one that's in the orange that's on the left-hand side is like a typical burrito bowl. So if you were to go to like Chipotle and order a burrito bowl, this is what a common order would be. And it comes out to just over 1,100 calories. So it includes your white rice, your black beans, chicken, which is usually cooked in some kind of sauce when you go out to a restaurant, especially something like Chipotle. No grilled vegetables. It has guacamole, salsa, sour cream, cheese, jalapenos, and you order an iced tea that is sweetened, so it has sugar in it. Okay, so all of that one burrito bowl is looking to be just over 1,100 calories. Now, how could we easily cut calories and make that a little bit healthier? Well, we could switch to a little less rice, switch to brown rice, 1 cup, and then add some romaine in there in order to lighten up the carb load there, or the grain load. We have black beans with reduced sodium, so that's not going to change the calories, but it's going to reduce the salt intake. Grilled chicken with a spice rub instead of a sauce. Okay, so you're making it at home, you can make it with a spice rub instead of a sauce. You add grilled vegetables. We do sliced avocado instead of a heavier guacamole. Fresh salsa instead of jarred salsa. That's going to make a big difference, especially in the sodium. Okay, no sour cream, or you could put yogurt, Greek yogurt on top. That's a great substitute for sour cream, much healthier. We have reduced fat cheese instead of full fat cheese. We still have the jalapenos because those are great, those are healthy. And then we have iced tea without the sugar. So those simple little switches, you still have that same burrito bowl and that same iced tea, but now we're talking about 715 calories instead of just over 1,100 calories. So we're saving 400 calories with those little swaps. That can go a long way. Okay, so just some important points there. All right, hold on 1 second. Okay. So now we went over all the different food groups, 2,000 calories. What does that look like? This next 2 slides show you how you could eat a truly healthy diet, eating these 2,000 calories that hits all of those food group goals that we just talked about. So you'll see here, we can start with overnight oats, which is going to give you some oats, some low-fat plain yogurt. We have coffee with it. For lunch, we have that chicken burrito bowl that we just talked about with your iced tea with no sugar. For dinner, you're going to have some oven roasted tilapia. Look, there's some pasta in there. Okay, so, but there's a small amount of pasta, not a huge plate of pasta, with some veggies mixed into it as your side. And then for your snacks, you have popcorn for one snack, and then the other snack is yogurt with some canned peaches on top of it that are canned in juice instead of syrup. And that's pretty much it. That's how you can do it. That's a sample of how you could have 2,000 calories and meet all those needs that we just talked about. Okay, and it's nothing crazy there. Okay, all right. So last few minutes, let's just quickly go over limiting foods and beverages that are high in added sugars, saturated fats, sodium, and alcoholic beverages. This is the last guideline in the dietary guidelines. So we talked about what you should have. Now let's talk about what we shouldn't have, okay? So all 4 of these things are typically high in Americans' diets, and what we get a lot of. So we want to focus on cutting back on these. So if you look at the balance that we should be maintaining, it's not that we need to cut these things out, it's that we need to cut back on them. So 85% of your total dietary pattern, we'll say, should be what we just talked about: the fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains, the healthy oils, the lean proteins. And then there's a small chunk, 15%, that should be maybe less, but it doesn't have to be: added sugars, sodium, saturated fats, and alcohol, okay? But most Americans are much, much, much higher than that 15% when it comes to what they're eating. And of course, that can change day to day, okay? So what we should do, less than 10% of calories should come from added sugars. Now added sugars is on the label, so it makes it a little bit easier to see that. Saturated fat, also less than 10% of our total caloric intake. Sodium should be less than 2,300 milligrams per day, and alcoholic beverages, either none or at most 1 for women, 2 for men per day, okay? There's no benefit to having the alcohol at just that 1 or 2 drinks. So if you don't want to drink, that's great too. But if you're going to, you want to stick to that. Okay, so just some interesting charts I'll throw up here to you really quickly before we wrap up. So it goes through each food group that we just talked about, the ones we want to limit, the added sugars, and it talks about, okay, what as Americans are we having from the added sugar category? So added sugars, the biggest one is sugar sweetened beverages. So sodas, juices, coffee drinks, stuff like that. And then next to that is desserts, sweets, snacks, things like that. So really interesting numbers there you guys can take a look at. You can see how many added sugars are in a lot of our drinks. Look at the highest one at the bottom. It's fruit drinks. That's juice. Okay, so juice is often like the one that's like, oh, juice is healthier. It has just as much sugar. Unless you're juicing it yourself, it can have just as much sugar, if not more, than soda and some other drinks that are out there. This one is our saturated fat intake. Look at the biggest group is sandwiches. Sandwiches on saturated fats. And then the next one is desserts, sweets, and snacks again. Okay? On our sodium, look at the biggest category. Sandwiches is again the biggest category on our sodium intake. Why? Why is it sodium? A typical sandwich. This is a very typical sandwich. This isn't like, you're going to the sub shop down the road and get a chicken parm. This is just the turkey sandwich you'll make at home. Okay, a turkey sandwich with a few slices of turkey, cheese, mustard, lettuce, and bread on average is 1,500 milligrams of sodium just for that one sandwich. And that's a normal small sandwich, not the big one you would get down the road at a restaurant or something like that. So that is Americans' biggest problem right there, is the sandwich, one of the biggest problems. Okay. And then alcohol is the last thing. So you can see calories that are in alcohol. It's broken down by wine, and rum and Coke is the highest at 190 calories if you're going to do something like that. But also you have wine in there. Average glass of wine, 120, average beer, 150, and average one shot, about 1.5 ounces of a liquor, is going to be about 100 calories by itself. So it can add up quickly, and that's why we want to limit it on that. Okay. And then what are the benefits? Stuff we already talked about. Okay, minimizing all those chronic diseases if we follow these. Okay. And then nutrients of concern, we don't have time to go over, but this is just the one slide I have with nutrients of concern. If you click on the nutrient, it takes you directly to the website, and it gives you, there's a huge list of foods that have calcium and how much in it, and foods that have potassium, fiber, vitamin D, all that good stuff. So you guys will have access to this and can view it when you can. And that's pretty much it, guys. So I'm going to stop there. I just threw a lot of information at you. I hope you got some key points out